Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Sin.
Hi, everyone. And welcome to the Snack Covenant episode 301. And today we're going to talk about the Crucible. So, Sophie.
Yes.
The Crucible.
The Crucible.
What is the Crucible?
Very good question. If it was ever a place, it would be something akin to like the Kiln of the First Flame in Dark Souls. Like somewhere where this event took place and it sort of shaped the world around it. But as it is in game now, I think the Crucible no longer exists because it became the Erd Tree.
So before it was the Erd Tree, what was it? What did it look like? Where did it come from?
Okay, so we need to get a little specific here about the exact timeline of what happens with the Erd Tree and Marika and everything. Right.
Okay.
So, the Elden Ring, as we understand it, the thing that is causing all the events in the game to happen, that predates the Erd Tree.
Mm-hmm.
We're not sure how old it is, but we're going to say that the earliest evidence we have of it is the Eternal Cities, which are those underground places.
Okay.
Sometime in the distant past, the Greater Will sends the Elden Ring to the Lands Between.
Mm-hmm.
And it sends it there in the form of some kind of meteorite or comet or shooting star. That impacts the planet, and the Elden Ring / Elden Beast / all the golden power is in the center of that space it lands in.
Okay.
In terms of where that is in game, it would be roughly where the area called Deeproot Depths is now. And that is an area where if you look down, you can't see the bottom. It is just a big pit. All of these roots are sort of crisscrossing it a bit like the Great Hollow in Dark Souls. But it doesn't have a bottom, and it's where you find the Elden Stars incantation.
Okay.
Which is the thing that mentions specifically there was a star that brought all this stuff to the Lands Between. And it's also where you find these enormously bloated ants that if you kill them, they drop Numen runes and they drop rune arcs, which is a sign that they're very, very close in proximity to sort of the power of the Elden Ring that's coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when that lands, it doesn't immediately sprout into the Erd Tree. The Erd Tree is something that happens later on. The Erd Tree is something that Marika creates, but there's a whole civilization that rises and falls prior to Marika. The Erd Tree itself doesn't actually come into being until Marika and Godfrey defeat the giants. So the Crucible is the name given to the sort of primal life energy that comes down with that meteorite / comet whatever. And that is the energy that Marika shapes into the Erd Tree. So prior to that point, it's just this massive sort of potential life that is called the Crucible. And they call it the Crucible because it's a place where sort of all the potential life that could flourish in the Lands Between is kind of condensed into one thing.
Hello? I cannot tell a lie. It is important to hydrate and stretch. Please maintain healthy listening habits.
So the Crucible is later shaped by Queen Marika into the Erd Tree. But that doesn't happen until after Marika and Godfrey beat the Fire Giants. And prior to that, there is an entire civilization that rises and falls but doesn't have an Erd Tree. It just has what we know of as the Crucible. And you can see evidence of this in the Eternal Cities. Specifically, the nameless Eternal City where the Deeproot Depths is. Because you can see that, the Erd Tree has sort of burst through the walls there. It's burst through the cave system. You can see this city that the roots of the Erd Tree and the branches of the Erd Tree have forcibly grown through, and they've destroyed chunks of it. It looks completely ruined and overgrown. It looks a lot like Lost Izalith.
Mm-hmm.
And you compare that to Leyndell, which is a city that's built around the Erd Tree. So they're it's sort of the same in a sense because it's a city with this huge tree incorporated into it. But Leyndell has been built around the Erd Tree. It sort of grows in tandem with it, whereas this nameless Eternal City, it's just ruined by the Erd Tree.
So that was a really good explanation. Thank you, Sophie. Now, I'm a little confused about something.
Mm-hmm.
What connection do the Crucible Knights have to the Crucible?
Right, so the Crucible Knights are an enemy type that we encounter a very small number of. And we never see their faces, we never see their bodies. That armor is called the Crucible Tree set. And it specifies that as a result of contacting the Crucible, something about them changed.
Mhm.
And that's why I think it's kind of significant that you don't see their faces at any point. Because it's kind of implied that, like, when they touched the Crucible, it changed them. And for all we know, that might actually be why they wear that armor. They use attacks that are called the aspects of the Crucible, which involve them using things that, like, are associated with sort of life forms that would have arisen from the Crucible. So they can do things like they can grow wings, they can grow tails, they can get a big sort of like throat pouch like a frog and vomit out fire. They can use horns and things like that. And those things are all also associated with an enemy type called the Misbegotten, and kind of also with the Omens. So the idea I think they're getting at is that as a result of contacting the Crucible, these knights, something about them changed. They may look very strange under that. They may kind of, for all we know, like they may have horns or like, multiple eyes or sort of scales underneath that armor, and that's why we don't see them. And it says that, they were heroes initially. They were heroes when Marika was fighting the giants and when they were establishing sort of control over the lands between. But when that was established, everyone turned on them. And they were kind of exiled, and it says they were exiled because of that sort of chaotic nature. And I think that's like when you find them, one is in an Everjail. That's probably the first one you'll find, is in an Everjail. So presumably they were locked up because it's like, it's someone we were hunting. There was something wrong with them. You have one who works with Tanith in Volcano Manor, so it's a Crucible Knight who's turned against the Erd Tree, which is kind of significant, considering they helped establish the thing. And then you've got a couple who were actually hanging around the Eternal Cities. Like, either they went back there, or that's just where they were. Like, they were in the Eternal Cities when the Crucible happened, and they've just stayed there. Like, it's not immediately clear.
Mhm.
Yeah, but none of them are sort of welcome in society anymore, which is very odd considering, like, they were the followers of Godfrey. So, you get Godfrey and Godfrey's tarnished, kicked out because they've lost the grace of gold, and then you get the Crucible Knights. They remain there, but they're shunned. And they're kind of like, they're exiled because there's something wrong with them.
So I have a question for all the cultists watching this.
No one else has made it this far.
Late at night, I think of you, your vision floods my mind.
We have crucible items like sets,
Mm-hmm.
weapons,
Mhm.
talismans.
Mm-hmm.
And my question to everyone is, do you think they're literally made from the crucible? Do you think it's symbolic? Or do you think it's a cheap imitation that you find in a local gift shop?
It's like the AliExpress version.
Yes.
I mean, Misbegottens are kind of like the AliExpress version of the Omen.
Sophie, you mentioned omens.
I did mention the Omen.
The Omen? I didn't know we were talking about the movie.
Hi, Sophie here with a little aside on the naming convention used with the Crucible Knights. Elden Ring only has 2 named Crucible Knights in it, but those names are significant. Ordovis and Siluria are pretty obvious references to the Ordovician and Silurian periods of Earth's history, which took place about 500 million years ago. Furthermore, the Ordovician and Silurian periods actually bookend a major extinction event. This all feeds into the idea that the Lands Between is actually a real physical place, and its ancient past is in fact its ancient past, rather than a vague creation myth like we get in Dark Souls. It also means that anyone who wants to create a thematically consistent Crucible Knight OC can just head over to Wikipedia and look up geological time periods. Possible names include Cambrius, Devonia, Mesozoia, Eosinus, Holocenia, and Terranuvia. That's right, I know about real science as well as fake social science. Back to the podcast. So the Omen are kind of interesting because the Omen display aspects of the Crucible that you also get with the Misbegotten, but they're not quite the Misbegotten, they're a separate kind of deal. Specifically, the Omen have horns all over them. Horns are very, very strongly associated with the Crucible. The idea being that, like, horns sort of make you closer to a beast. So the Crucible, because it's all this, like, potential life, it involves sort of like the horns and teeth of animals that sort of you wouldn't expect humans to have. It's like sort of the thing that separates humans from animals is like blurred by the Crucible, because the Crucible is saying all life is one, instead of there being like a sort of a stark division between human and beast. It's very, actually very old blood in a sense.
Yeah.
So what I think is significant is that at least two of Marika and Godfrey's kids are Omen. So that's Morgoth and Mog. This family tree is absolutely massive, and we know there's a whole lot of people we don't meet. And there is an established protocol for what happens if omens are born to royalty. So we can kind of assume safely there were more than two. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a protocol.
Okay.
So, what I think is significant there is that it's the Crucible Knights that come in contact with the Crucible and get changed by it. And the Crucible Knights follow Godfrey. And Godfrey is the father of those Omen. So I think Godfrey, even though like he doesn't appear to be sort of mutated in any way, Godfrey probably got some of the Crucible in him. Like he probably somehow got contaminated or warped or something by exposing himself to the Crucible. Because Marika and Godfrey kind of become an item and work together and fight everybody before there's an Erd Tree. So at some point, like when he's with the Crucible Knights, Godfrey probably got like directly exposed to the Crucible. Like it's not clear how the Crucible is actually shaped into the Erd Tree. It's left deliberately sort of like mythic, like it's just she fashions it into the Erd Tree.
Mm-hmm.
But we can assume that like she probably had help if the Crucible Knights got exposed to it. The other alternative there is that the Crucible Knights found the Crucible before Godfrey met Marika. Again, it's very vague, but like one potential backstory is that Godfrey and the Crucible Knights were underground in the Eternal Cities, and they found the Crucible and found Marika that way, and then Marika saw them as a way to get to the surface. As opposed to like they were always on the surface and then Marika came and found them. Like it could be either. But like if it's the former, then okay, they probably encountered the Crucible directly. Like before Marika, before the Erd Tree. But anyway, it's kind of significant that like Godfrey and his friends touch the Crucible, and then Godfrey's kids end up with all these like Omen sort of deformities to them. The one that doesn't is Godwyn. And Godwyn looks like he is the one who is set to be next in line.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at like the other kids, like the way that the demigods are shown, like with relation to their parents, it's usually like they take after one, not the other. So like the obvious one is Melania and Mikola, where Mikola is like very blonde and very youthful. His power is associated with like abundance and life and growth, which is exactly what Marika's domain is. And like Marika's got like the long flowing blonde hair, and so does Mikola.
Right.
And then you have Melania, who is this like sort of incomplete person who nevertheless is like associated with war. And she has the flowing red hair that takes after Radigan. So if you kind of apply that setup to the initial Godfrey-Marika pairing, then it's like, okay, Godwyn is the one that took after Marika. He's like the sort of, the quote-unquote divine one. Like he's like the golden one who's the sort of like perfect favorite son who's going to succeed her. And then you have Morgoth and Mog, who seem to take after Godfrey. And they are the ones who are like, you know, the ones with the horns and the tails who are sort of like cast aside and they're locked under Lanedale in the sewers.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like, the order of birth is not confirmed, but I think it's like, it's sort of clear to me, looking at the way that they talk about succession, that Morgoth would have been, like, next in line. Like, it would have gone, like, Godwyn and then Morgoth, but Morgoth, because he's an Omen, can't take the throne.
Mm-hmm.
So Morgoth, like, he wouldn't be Godwyn's twin, because they specified, like, Morgoth and Mog are twins. So he presumably would have been born sometime after Godwyn, but not that long after. But yeah, like, this seems like Godfrey kind of introduced the Crucible into that line in a way that maybe they didn't intend. And that's why you get these Omens born, and that's why, like, it's Godwyn's line that gets treated like it's the important one, because he's the one that didn't get, like, He got his mother's side of the family, not his father's.
Hmm. So it's almost like the crucible releases some sort of crucible radiation that affects people that come in contact with it.
So it's not like clear where a lot of these creatures actually come from, because it does specify like, okay, Omen are just born like that, like they're born to human, quote unquote, normal human parents. They have a child who is an Omen, and if that happens, like the Omen are they're cast into the Lanedale sewers, and the ones that escape get hunted down and killed. It's like a sign, like they're called the Omen because literally it's an omen that something's going to go wrong. There's something wrong with the kid. The misbegotten are a little stranger. Like, it's not clear if the misbegotten are born to human parents or the misbegotten are just like something like the demi-humans, like they're just like a species that exist. But that in itself is very weird because there's all these different kinds of misbegotten. Like, some of them, they're called the scaly ones, some of them have wings, some of them are more lion-like. It's not clear, like, if they grow by themselves, are they like their own species, or are they born to human parents? The misbegotten are treated similar, though, to the Omen. They're used as slaves. Presumably, like, they're shunned, they're cast out, but also, like, this is made clear in Castle Morn that, like, they're also an underclass that's sort of acknowledged.
Mhm.
Like, they're used as slave labor, basically, to keep Castle Morn running.
Okay.
Yeah.
Certain items mention a crucible tree.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that?
Okay, so the Crucible becomes the Erd Tree.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's like there's a specific thing called the Crucible Tree. It's like, it's a Crucible tree helm. Like, the Crucible spawned all of this life, it also spawned, like, tree things. So, the thing about the Crucible, like, set is it looks like it's warped. Like, the branches are growing, but they're growing into horn patterns that you'd see on an animal.
Okay.
Yeah, so something about, like, the sort of chaotic nature of the Crucible, it's in the Erd Tree and it's in these other sort of tree things that you find.
Okay, thank you. We talked about Kigara in the past and how it's a recurring theme in From Software games. Does the Crucible have an equivalent in previous From Software games?
I likened it a little bit to Old Blood back then, because, like, the thing about Old Blood in Bloodborne is it's not like, oh, this is a werewolf virus, which is what it's presented as by the people in the story. It's like, within your body, like, there is the remnants of, like, when people were animals. So it's sort of letting that out. It's like it's making you lose touch with your humanity, so you sort of like snap and become something that's like you devolve into what you used to be. The Crucible is similar to that, where it's like there was all these potential kinds of life and potential kind of things that could have happened. There was no Golden Order prior to this. There was another kind of order. There was the order they had in the Eternal Cities, but it wasn't Marika's order. So when Marika creates her own Golden Order, which is when she creates the Erdtree, it seems to be like she creates it when she removes death from the Elden Ring, because she becomes obsessed with life.
Mm-hmm.
Which is something we can talk about in like another episode when we want to talk about the Nox, because that seems to be connected to the Nox being obsessed with death. But Marika basically, she has all this primordial life and she shapes it into one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't go away. She just shapes it into something. So there's all these other things in there that are sort of dormant that you can bring out. So in the same way that like Bloodborne has, okay, humans used to be beasts, used to be animals. This blood like allows that part of them to come back again. The misbegotten and the omens and all this other stuff are this, horns and scales and wings and things like that. They're in the history of life in the lands between, and this is them sort of like they were repressed, but they're breaking through again.
Thank you, Sophie. And the old blood really takes effect when the red moon descends.
Yeah.
So what would happen to the Crucible if the red moon descends in Elden Ring?
Well, presumably there'd be like a series of fights between the moon presence and all the other outer gods.